If you're applying to medicine this year and have been invited to interview, then in all likelihood that interview is going to be online. Now the content is pretty much the same, but the format and the way to deliver it and the way to actually stand out and make yourself look good and get through the interview so that you get made an offer is a bit different. So here we're going to look at how you can adapt to online interviews to make sure that you smash it and confirm that final step, which is to get your offer. Before we look at techniques and how you should communicate, one of the most important things that I want you to do is start by making a good first impression. Normally this will be things like about how you dress, how you enter the room, how you greet the other interviewers. But here we're looking at how your appearance is on camera. So there are a few factors that you really need to consider to make sure that you're looking as good as you can and creating the kind of impression that you want to when you come to interview. So the things that we're going to look at to make sure that you're creating a good first impression is your camera, where you position it, how you frame it, the use of audio, the use of lighting, and also what we'll call set dressing, which is basically the background of the room within which you decide to conduct your interview. So the first thing we'll talk about is your camera, and it's more about the positioning and where exactly in the room you put it, because I'm not saying that you need to have a really good fancy camera to make sure the picture quality is really good. The one that you have on the top of your laptop or a standard webcam that you can buy online is absolutely fine, but it's all about how you use that camera that's going to matter. So the first thing I want you to do is think about framing. The reason we talk about framing is because body language is such a big important part of your interview and how you communicate. Now, if your camera is placed in a way that you can't exhibit good body language because they can't see it because it's off camera, then you can't really tick that box and you can't come across the same way that you would in person online. Because here, everything that we're trying to do is recreate the best bits of you that are there in person and make sure that they come across through the camera. So there are two things that I want you to remember when it comes to the camera. The first is making sure that the camera is at eye level so that you can look directly into the lens, and we'll talk about that a bit later. The other thing is what you can see of you, so the framing for how much of your body is in the shot. Now this is too close for an interview, so what I'm going to show you now is a rough distance to how I think you should sit. So this is about the right amount that I want you to be able to see of yourself on the screen when you're presenting for interview. That's because you want to be able to see your hands so that when you're gesticulating and talking, obviously you don't want to do too much at interview, but when you're using your hands to express yourself, you can see that. You can see that I'm exhibiting good body language by cupping my hands, leaning forward, leaning into the camera, not doing some of the stupid things like slouching or being too nonchalant. You can see from the camera that you're actually quite well engaged. The other thing I want you to think about is the background that you have behind you. You might think that it's irrelevant, but subconsciously it really does contribute. The same way that if somebody is well dressed, you can just tell that someone has put some effort into it and they're taking it seriously. And even if they're not thinking it explicitly, somewhere in their subconscious, it is sending the signal that you're professional and you're the kind of person that they want to give a place to become a doctor. So what I would recommend for when you actually have the big day is that you have a very clean, simple, plain background. If you look at some of the more formal videos that I've recorded in this very same room, you can see that all I have is simply one picture to the side of me, a plant to the other side, and just a plain white background. One of the most important things is, as a distraction, it's important not to have anything coming out of your head. You can see how I'm placed here between two bits and nothing is distracting from exactly what's coming up behind me. I would say that you should have it even cleaner than that, but that is a bare minimum as a rule. Another thing is to not worry too much if something looks a bit silly off camera in real life, as long as it looks good when you're actually filming. For example, this picture that you can see behind me, although it looks perfectly placed on camera, I will show you just how ridiculous it is in real life. So you can see that it's actually not even at head height. So the door is here and the ceiling is way up here. The other thing that's important to remember is that you should still look the part when it comes to what you're wearing. So that typically means a suit and tie for a gentleman and maybe office wear for a woman, whatever works for you. But what you don't want to do is be wearing a suit and be suited and booted in the top half and be wearing your PJs on the bottom half. Tell your brain that this is important and get yourself dressed for game day, which is what this is. The other thing that's going to contribute massively to how your set looks and how you look on camera is good lighting. Now, you don't have to go out and buy a fancy light. You either need to be very close to a window, and the importance is here that you're facing out to the window so that the light coming in from the outdoors is bouncing off the window onto your face and then onto the camera lens. Similarly, if you don't have a location in the house that you can be by a big window and still get good internet connection and all the other specifics that I'll talk about later that make a good location in the house to interview from, all you need to do is put the lamp behind the lens so that again the light is bouncing off your face back onto the lens and making you well lit. Just to make a point of how much of an impression and good lighting can make, let me show you the difference between good lighting, which is what this is like now, and this, which looks significantly less professional and definitely makes me look a lot uglier. The other thing I want you to think about is your audio. Now, usually and typically most laptops will be fine, the microphone will be fine, the speakers will be fine, but I just want you to test run this just to make sure that it's up to a standard that's not going to hinder your performance at the interview. If your speakers on your laptop or computer that you're using aren't particularly good, typically a good substitute is AirPods because they still look professional, they're discreet, and they're pretty well accepted. And if the microphone on your laptop isn't particularly good, you can always get a cheap microphone off Amazon for less than a tenner, and that will make sure that it fixes everything. So we talked for a long time there about making an impression and kind of what I'd call set design, but it's really important to focus on because you don't understand just how much. When I was interviewing, the people that I used to interview, you could tell within the first 30 seconds whether you're going to offer them a place or not. And that's usually determined by three things, which is 1, how they walk into the room, 2, how they're dressed, and 3, how they greet the panel. These are really important things that you are going to make your first impression with, so you should spend a bit of time making sure they're on point. So now let's talk about the practicalities of the day, how we're going to adapt our style to make sure that we score as highly as we can on these interviews. It's important to note that when the interview starts, whether it's panel or MMI, you're going to have 1 or maybe 2 or 3 other people talking to you in a group call, and it's going to start quite awkwardly because what normally would happen is that you would walk into a room and you'd greet them and kind of say some formal hellos. So firstly, when you start, you need to be ready for the person basically starting in a really unnatural way and saying, "Hi, is that Emily?" and you saying yes. So instead of just saying yes and it being an awkward start, you can really take control and get off on the right foot by when they say, "Oh, hi, is that Emily?" you say, "Yes, hi, it's nice to meet you all." And just really a nice way to introduce yourself and kind of get it in before they give you the opportunity or you lose the opportunity to make a nice warm first impression. Another really important thing that I want you to be conscious of is when the video and the audio starts through an interview, I want you to be very aware of how you come across. For example, when I have people who are applying to my FutureDoc Elite coaching program for me to mentor them one-on-one, on the calls when they're kind of trialing to see or interviewing to see if they're eligible to join, when I start a call, typically on Zoom, the first thing that I see is that they're completely not paying attention, or they're distracted, or they might be even doing something embarrassing like picking their nose while they're waiting for that audio to connect. Although I don't let that stop me and kind of hinder my judgment of people, it does subconsciously create a first impression. So it's just really important at that time to think of how you're coming across and use it to kind of remind yourself of the body language that you want to be exhibiting. Positive body language is sitting upright, hands cupped in your lap, sitting nice and forward, that framing that we talked about so that we can see kind of from your belly button up to just above the top of your head. Also making sure that you're not slouching and you're comfortable. And one of the big things to make sure that you don't do when you're interviewing online is to have your hands like this or over your face, or do the kind of thing that is typical for people to want to do when they're sat on the computer. So no touching of your face, no cupping of your hands over your mouth, and all those things that create a bit of a bad impression. Now, of course, because you're not in the room, you can't make direct eye contact with people. But the way around that is to look directly down the barrel of the lens. Now, that's really important for you to practice to make sure that you get used to it, because at first it feels weird because you're not looking at anything or you're not looking at another person. But on the other side, it makes a huge difference to them feeling like you're looking directly at them versus if you're looking at a screen like this, which is what this looks like when you're talking to the screen rather than to the lens. It just makes a big difference with the connection that you make with the person on the other side. Alternatively, when you're listening to them and you're not the one speaking, you obviously need to look at the screen so that you can see what they're saying, read their facial expressions and all that sort of stuff. So what I would say is that you can kind of pay attention to the screen when they're talking, occasionally looking up at the lens so it feels like you're making eye contact with them. But then when you're talking, do the majority of your eye contact with the lens, occasionally looking down at the screen to just check their reception to what you're saying, check their facial expressions, and just read the person to see if what you're saying is landing. The other thing that's important with online interviews is to adapt your speech. It's going to be less easy to hear you than it would be in real life. So one of the things that you need to do is enunciate your words a lot more, speak more slowly and clearly so that they can understand you. Here it's really important to be aware if there's a lag between you finishing speaking and them starting, so that you don't keep clashing and speaking over each other. If there is, just be very confident and mature about it and say, "I'm I'm really sorry that there seems to be a lag, and just by saying it and acknowledging it means that they know that you're not talking over them and being rude. And because of the lags that you get with online video calls, it's also difficult to know when one person's finished, ready for you to ask the next question, or vice versa. So when you're delivering an answer, it's usually good to kind of give some sort of non-verbal cue that you've finished. So finishing a long answer, meaning that you've finished with what you're saying and you're ready for them to ask you the next question or push back on your answer. And I will finish my answer with a nice smile and a nod. And that just gives them a basic cue to let them know that it's their turn to talk. Similarly, when you're on the other end and you're getting an answer or they're speaking, just have a very slight pause at the end of their sentences to make sure that you're not jumping in too soon and talking over them. One of the other important factors that we need to consider for your interview is the technical considerations. Now, there's a video here where I go through this in a lot of depth, so check that out to find out what gear you need to use and basically how to set it up to make sure that it looks the best it possibly can when it comes to your big day. The three most important things that I would say from that are to practice using the platform that the university is going to use for your interview. So make sure that you can use it well and you can use it under the pressure of your interview. The second is to make sure that you do everything to maximize your internet speed. To make sure there's no one on the internet that doesn't need to be unnecessarily, no ridiculous downloads that are using up your bandwidth, and all that sort of thing that are going to reduce the internet speed and video quality for your interview. And finally, make sure that all your equipment is plugged into the main so that you don't run on battery and risk it cutting out halfway through. The best way to make sure that this happens and runs smoothly is to do a trial run. So do a mock interview with a friend where you go through all your equipment and just make a checklist for all the things that you need to make sure are done, that you roll through on the big day to make sure that nothing goes amiss. So that gives you the most important things that you need to know to perform well on your interview day and just smash it so that you realize your offer and get through the final hurdle. If you want to go into a bit more depth about some of the things that we've discussed, along with some of the common things that go wrong and how to avoid them, also what location in your house is best to choose, and then finally how to conduct a trial run and a mock interview with a friend that goes well, check out this video here where we go through all of that. It's a much longer video, so much more in depth if you want to go deeper. Other than that, thanks for watching and I'll see you in that video.